You're budgeting backwards. You start with the calendar and you say, in Q2, I'll hire 2 engineers. In Q3, I'll increase the ad spend. And in Q4, I'll bring a sales lead. But what if Q2 revenue doesn't hit? What if the pipeline in Q3 collapses? You committed spend against future that didn't happen. Now that is not a budget. That is a wish list with dates on it. Real budgets don't follow the calendar. They follow outcomes. And in this video, I'll show you how to tie every hire and every dollar to revenue milestones so that your budget only expands when the business actually earns it. Hi, my name is Kishore Dasaka and I run a fractional CFO firm for tech startups. I've watched founders blow through runway because they spent for Q3 in Q1. And here's what I see constantly. A founder builds a budget in January, lays out hiring by quarter, maps spends to months, and the board approves it. And then they start executing. They hire the Q2 engineer in April, even though March revenue was missed by 30%. They increase ad spends in July, even though the pipeline is half of what they'd initially projected. They bring on the sales lead in October, even though the close rates have completely collapsed. Why? Because it was there in the budget. And the budget said Q2, Q3, and Q4. By the year end, they've spent like a $5 million company, but they're running a $2.5 million business. The runway is gone and layoffs are coming. This is the calendar budget trap. You've committed spend tied to certain dates, not tied to outcomes. And when outcomes didn't arrive, you spent anyway. Here's how I build budgets now. Every hire, every spend increase, every investment is tied to a trigger, not a date, but a milestone. We hire the second AE when the MRR hits 150,000. We increase ad spend when the payback drops below 12 months. We bring on the sales lead when the pipeline coverage holds 4 times for 2 consecutive months. The calendar here is irrelevant. The outcome is everything. If MRR doesn't hit the $150,000 budget, you don't hire the AE. If CAC payback doesn't improve, you don't increase the ad spend. And if the pipeline coverage doesn't hold, you don't add the headcount. The budget expands only when the business earns it, not when the calendar says so. Let me get specific. Every line item in your budget needs 2 things, a trigger and an outcome. A trigger is what has to be true before you spend. And an outcome is what will this spend really end up achieving. So in the case of hiring, don't budget saying that you'll hire 2 engineers in Q2. Budget saying engineer number 3 when the monthly revenue hits $200,000 and when the product backlog exceeds 6 weeks of work. The outcome tied to this is shipping the enterprise feature that unlocks $500,000 in pipeline. That is the trigger of revenue and the demand signal. An outcome here is specific and measurable. If revenue doesn't hit 200,000, you don't hire, you don't need to. Now coming to marketing spend. Don't budget things like increase paid ads to $50,000 a month in Q3. The right way of budgeting is scale paid ads to $50,000 a month when the CAC payback is under 10 months. And in this case, the outcome is generating 40 qualified leads per month for the sales team. The trigger is the efficiency proof, and the outcome in this case is the pipeline. If CAC payback is 18 months, then you don't scale the ad spend. You're just burning cash faster. The next one is the sales headcount. Don't budget things like adding a sales lead in Q4. For what? The right way of budgeting is add a sale when team hits 3 reps and pipeline coverage holds for 2 consecutive months. The outcome here is to increase the close rate from 20% to 28% through deal support and process. The trigger here is the team size and the pipeline health. And the outcome is very clear, which is a conversion improvement. If the pipeline is 2x, you don't need a sales lead. You need more pipeline, a bigger pipeline, which will then justify a sales lead. Every hire, every spend, and every investment needs to be tied to a trigger. What has to be true? And the outcome is what will that achieve? If you can't answer both, it should not be there in the budget. Here's what happens with calendar budget. Revenue misses, but you've already committed to the spend. Or worse, you've already made the hire or rolled out the offer letter. Now the problem is you're underwater. You're paying for capacity that you don't need. You're burning the runway against a plan that is already bored. Explaining to the board why you're over budget when the real problem is your under revenue. Outcome-based budgeting doesn't have this problem. If the revenue misses, triggers don't fire. The spend doesn't happen. You're automatically right-sized to the business that you actually have, not the business that you've hoped for. I had a client last year. A calendar budget said hire 4 people by Q3. We rebuilt the triggers and Q2 revenue was missed by 20%. Under the old budget, they would have hired anyway. But under the new budget, only one trigger fired. They hired only one person and extended the runway by 3 months. By Q4, the revenue recovered. More triggers fired and they hired the other 3. Same outcome, but 6 months later with way less risk. Founders ask me, won't the board a calendar-based plan? Yes, of course they do. You give them one, but frame it as a milestone-based plan, not a time-based plan. Here's the plan for the year, and these are the hires and investments that we're expected to make. Each one is tied to a specific. If we hit our revenue milestones, this is the pace. If we don't, we flex the timeline automatically. So here's the exercise. Take every hire in your budget. Take every spend increase and take investment that you've committed to make. For each one, write 2 things. The trigger, what milestone has to be true before this happens, and the outcome, what is the specific result that this will achieve. If you can't write both, cut it from the budget or rethink it. Then build the budget in 2 views. View 1, which is the milestone plan. What you will spend when each trigger fires, not dates, outcomes. View number 2, the calendar estimate. When you expect each trigger to fire based on the correct projections. This is the version that you will give the board. When the reality shifts, the calendar changes, but the milestone logic still remains the same. You always know what you're spending for, and you never spend for a future that didn't arrive. So stop budgeting by the calendar and start budgeting by the outcome. Your budget should expand when the business earns it, not when January said it would.